Jonah Goldberg, maybe he's certainly one of my favorite political writers. He is witty. His prose is graceful. He's got all kinds of a range of knowledge, both pop culture and intellectual culture. His book is fascinating, Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. It's out today. Jonah is senior editor at National Review, as well as a Los Angeles Times columnist. He's the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Liberal Fascism, which is just terrific. I thought an epoch-making study of the 30s and 40s, and The Tyranny of Cliches. Here he is discussing his new book, Suicide of the West. Jonah, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
It's great to be here, man.
Suicide of the West. First of all, I've read every word of this, which is going to make this a unique interview in the history of American journalism.
This is unprecedented. No one reads the book.
I know. I don't know what came over me. It just caught me out. I thought I'd skim it, and then I was caught up in it. No, I mean, you do terrific work, as always. But let's talk about this. I mean, it's called Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. Now, I was going to wait for the musical to come out, but I mean, that is not a happy title. I mean, do you believe that the West is actually committing suicide?
What was it? It might be an apocryphal story, but Chou En-lai, the former Chinese premier, was once asked what he thought about what the verdict was on the French Revolution in like 1973, and his response was, "Too soon to tell." and
Okay.
So, look, for a book that begins about 300,000 years ago, I think my conception of suicide can have a long time frame on it. I think the reason I chose suicide, not death of the West or decline of the West, is that suicide's a choice. And I think our civilization is making choices right now that, if carried to their logical extreme or logical conclusion, are suicidal in nature.
So it's not a Marx Steinian vision of those kinds of choices. You're talking about much different choices. What are the choices you're talking about?
Right. So I was very influenced by economic historian Deirdre McCloskey, who basically argues that this thing I call the miracle, right? Whatever you want to call it, liberal democratic capitalism, modernity, right? This thing that emerges essentially from, I would argue, from the English Enlightenment or the Scottish Enlightenment. One of the things that Steve Pinker gets wrong is treating the Enlightenment like they're all one thing.
Right.
Because, as Mike Myers would say in So I Married an Axe Murderer, when it comes to enlightenments, if it's not Scottish, it's crap. But one of the things that Deirdre McCloskey, I think, is fairly persuasive on is that the thing that made this once in all of human history transformation into human prosperity, human fulfillment that you get starting in the 1700s, and that the American founding is the symbol of, was all created by words, ideas, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And what I don't think she fully appreciates is that a civilization that can be created by words can also be destroyed by words. That if you don't, if you don't express gratitude for these amazing things that we have, this incredible gift that we sort of stumbled into, you're in danger of losing it. In the Bible, Old Testament and New, the whole idea of gratitude and remembering certain things, it really means honoring certain things, is hugely important for keeping the spirit of God alive, keeping a civilization alive. And I think that's true in secular terms as well. If you don't take a moment to have some gratitude for where we are as a species right now and how we got here, what happens is that you then breed entitlement and resentment. And that's suicidal, right? So it's not demography and the Marx Steinian kind of thing. It's certainly not Marxist. I don't believe in cold impersonal forces guiding us. I think that, as Ronald Reagan would say, freedom is not, we don't inherit freedom in our blood. It's in danger every generation. It has to be taught. Civilization is a verb. We're all born naked, penniless, and ignorant, and human nature has no history. So what is required of every generation is to teach the next generation those things that should be grateful for because that's the only way you're going to conserve and preserve them, is to teach them to be grateful for them.
You know, it's really interesting when you say this. I read Pinker's book too, and one of the things that I like Pinker a lot, and I enjoy his writing. But he does kind of get so materialist that, you know, he basically says that, you know, look, you've got long life and good health and money. What else do you want? But I mean, people do want something else, don't they? They want freedom. They want some kind of idea of meaning in their lives. And you kind of talk about that more. You have a sense that this is something that can be preserved and recreated.
I do, and I think one of the reasons, I agree with you. You know, Pinker is sort of a Vulcan.
Yeah,
You know, and he's incredibly useful in explaining the material side of things.
Right.
But because he's such a, you know, and again, I use his books a lot for my book, but he's such a secular sort of materialist. He kind of doesn't have a lot of patience for the more spiritual, romantic side of things. And I argue, you know, going back to Will Herberg, one of the great sort of conservative intellectuals, that man should properly be understood as homo religio. We are hardwired to want something more than just simple material goods. We want a sense of meaning, a conception of our place in the universe. We want religion, and I mean religion in the broadest sense, that we need a system. We want a system of values that tells us our place, gives us a sense of meaning, fills the holes in our soul, and that stuff isn't being taught either. And you know, Mary Eberstadt had a great piece in The Atlantic not long ago, talking about how the rise of the identity politics that we see today can be tracked to the breakdown of the family in the 1970s. And because what happens is we are born seeking a sense of meaning in our place in the world, and if we don't get it from our family, it doesn't mean we had stopped searching for it. You know, Robert Nisbet called it the quest for community, and we start looking elsewhere for it. Identity politics, which says your entire existence can be summed up by the color of your skin or your gender preferences or whatever, is a source of meaning. I think it's a cheap and shabby source of meaning, but it's a very real one for a lot of people. And so what you have to keep in mind is that human nature abhors a vacuum. If you don't provide people with a healthy sense of meaning, a healthy sense of belonging in the world, they'll find an unhealthy one. It's sort of like the G.K. Chesterton thing about, if you stop believing in God, it's not that you won't believe in anything, it's that you won't believe in nothing, you'll believe in anything, right? And so people will find other things as sources of meaning, and most of those are just simply likely not to be healthy and not contribute to the sustaining of the civilization that we live in.
So where, if we're now at this pretty pass, you know, where did this begin? I mean, I know I don't see your fan club picture of Donald Trump behind you. I know you're not a big Trump fan, but he's obviously not the start of anything. I mean, he's
So he's way downstream, right? All of politics is downstream of, I think, these cultural trends. I think that politicians can make these cultural trends worse.
Sure.
But you know, Barack Obama, if you read his second inaugural, his vision of what America is about, which was a consistent theme throughout his presidency, is that you have two political units. You have the individual and you have the state in Washington, right? Nothing else, right? And the problem with that is that it is a really cheap form of sort of progressive libertarianism, in the sense that you're free to do all the little things that you want to do as an individual, but if you need help with anything else, the only place you can look to is Washington. And the problem with that is that the place you get meaning in life starts with the family. I mean, again, Hannah Arendt has this great line. She says, every generation, Western civilization is invaded by barbarians. We call them children, right?
Certainly happened in my house, yeah.
Yeah, no, in every house. As a species, we are all born naked, penniless, and ignorant. And we come with a lot of preloaded software. But if we don't get the updates starting in the family, we can be, we can go off the rails. If you took a baby living today and sent it back 1,000 years to a Viking village, went into New Rochelle and stole a baby and sent it to a Viking village. And if it was adopted by a Viking family, it would grow up to pillage Western England. If you took a Viking baby and you sent it to New Rochelle, it would grow up to be an orthodontist. The civilization that you're born into matters enormously. And I think the breakdown of civil society, the breakdown of the family, these institutions where we get our sense of meaning and belonging, as they break down, we look for other ones. And so You have all these people who don't want to have anything to do with their real communities. Instead, they want to spend time on virtual communities. But Facebook is fine for keeping up with old friends. It is horrible for making new friends, because what it ends up doing, particularly in the political context, is reinforcing and confirming your existing biases and multiplying them on both the left and the right. And so I think that one of the things that we're having is we retreat from civil society, which there's an enormous amount of social science that is in fact happening, is we start to watch politics as if it's a form of entertainment. And we start rooting for our heroes and rooting against the villains. And we see it simply as a story of drama of my team versus your team. And that, I think, leads to very unhealthy politics, whether it has anything to do with Trump or not. That trend existed long before Trump came on the scene. He exploited it to win, but he's not to blame for it.
You know, do you feel, I felt this when I was reading Pinker's book, that when he writes about Donald Trump, I suddenly thought, calm down, It's like, he may be a good president, he may be a bad president. He's kind of living in all of our heads rent-free at this point. Are we thinking about this guy too much? I mean, do you see him as a real break with something? Like I said, I know you're not a fan, but do you see him as an actual break or just a kind of bump in the road?
I think he represents a real break of sorts. I don't think he represents the break that the resistance wants to turn him into, right? I mean, my standard line is, look, Donald Trump isn't Hitler. Hitler could have repealed Obamacare. He's not this dangerous, despot. But he is a creature of entertainment culture. And I think he views the job through that prism way too much for my tastes. And I think that, Orwell has this great line where he says, a man can feel himself a failure and take to drink and become all the more of a failure because he drinks. I think that one of the problems that I think you and some of my friends who are sort of more pro-Trump than I am, what they don't appreciate is the dialectic nature of our politics these days. Donald Trump's misbehaviors often repeatedly get defended because of things that Barack Obama did. I shudder to think what Elizabeth Warren will do, citing some of the things that that Donald Trump has done as a precedent.
Yeah.
And I also wonder what a Democratic president will be able to do or be guilty of in their personal lives that conservatives will be able to denounce, that they won't be hypocritical for, given what they defended in this guy. And that, I think, is going to be a real problem.
Yeah, I can see that being a problem down the road too. But your vision, weirdly, is more hopeful than your title. I mean, your title just And now, so where do we start? What would you like to see happen that is realistic, that could actually begin to happen in this country?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have a lot of public policy program in here because, in part of my argument is that the rhetoric matters, right? I say if a civilization created by words, it can be destroyed by words. That means one of the things I want to get people to do is think about how they talk about their own civilization, their own culture, their own country, and that's part of the argument of the book. But if you want a sort of a basic public policy argument, push as much power as possible down to the most local level possible. When you say that to left wingers, they immediately say, "Oh, so you want to have Jim Crow or slavery back?" I was like, "No, no. I mean, we fought a war, we amended the Constitution a couple times. That's a settled issue, right?" But do I think that hipsters in Oregon should be able to order stinky cheese from France without the FDA saying it's okay? Yeah. Do I think that people should be able to organize their lives as long as they respect basic civil rights and basic human rights as they want? Yes. And you'll still have culture wars. But one of the great things about pushing this stuff to the most local level possible is the winners have to look the losers in the eye the next day, right? You have to see them at the kids' soccer games, and you at that supermarket. You have this, and that breeds a certain amount of humility. That you're talking about your neighbors, you're talking about the parents of your kid's best friend when you get into political arguments. Right now, because of this thing I was talking about before about treating politics as a form of entertainment, where we all just sit in our living rooms and watch it on TV, is you end up getting these grand coalitions between one political tribe and another, where you never actually have to deal with the human being on the other side of the argument. At the more local you get, starting in the family, you know the names of the powers that be. You know them by their first name. If in the family, that's mom and dad, right? But even in local communities or in your school, you know the names of the principal, you know the names of your alderman, you know the names of your parish priest, you know the names of the people in your community, and it gives you a sense of control over your own life, which is one of the reasons why I think politics is so bad right now, is people don't feel like they have that sense of control over their own lives. So push it all the way down.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. I wish we could talk for another hour about this, because I just think there's so much in this book, and it covers, as you say, it covers an awful lot of history. Yeah, but The Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. Jonah Goldberg, one of the best political writers in the country, if not the best. Jonah, it's always great to see you. I hope you'll come back again.
I would love to come back, and next time you're in DC, you got to let me know, and we'll have you on my podcast, and you can rail at me for an hour.
All right, I will be there. All
right, man.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you. Really interesting. I love the fact that I asked him like what he would like to have done, and he had an excellent answer. It's like more local government, which is, by the way, something that's actually happening. And I'll try and talk about this tomorrow if I can. The country looks a lot different at the local level than it does at the national level.